Hey, P students, we are starting here with our first of really three total. There are going to be 20 question blocks of some practice questions. And so, anyway, here's the title for our first one. And again, it would have been assigned obviously first, but the way that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do my best to kind of go along and hopefully have you also take guesses, and maybe you got some wrong, but if you can write down your guesses, um, that you would have had. And I know the website isn't perfect um, to keep track of which ones you got right and wrong or whatever, and tell you which ones are what the right answer is. Um, but my goal is to eventually let you kind of see how I figure them out, and then if you can make that work for you, awesome. If not, then hopefully you have a different strategy and you can kind of see what you're doing right or wrong. And so, anyway, we're going to get started here. Obviously, if you get them right and you know what you're doing, by all means, fast forward through some things. I'm going to do my best to try to do this in one take. So, bear with me as I'm trying to save myself some time as well. As always, you can email me with questions. But with that being said, we're going to get started. So, first question, starting out early on, is with our production possibilities curve. And again, so I'm going to load up these answers here as we go forward. So they'll stay on there. So if you haven't taken guesses yet, you definitely want to make sure you're doing that. If I need to draw something, I'm going to pull this up, and hopefully that helps us out. So I'll just get started with our production possibilities curve, right? It has this bow to it, right? And so we have product A, product B. And so if we're starting right here, remember, if I produce more B, right, I'm not giving up very much A. As I get over here, right, I'm producing more B. I'm giving up a whole lot of A. As I get down here, a little bit of more of B, but a whole lot of A. So that's our increasing opportunity costs. Hopefully that's review. That's something you got to probably eventually remember when we get to that test situation. All right, moving on to number 2 here. Government subsidies, those are going to be tax breaks. Okay, so going back to like our demand talk, I'm sorry, our supply and demand talk about shifters, tax breaks are going to shift our supply to the right, is what you want to remember with that. And it's asking you about promoting the development of technology. Widespread business applications have which of the following effects? Okay, so again, what we've got to remember is that somehow our supply is going to shift to the right. Okay, subsidies shift our supply to the right. We can also tie this into our macro graph here, where we have price level and real GDP, and know that price level and GDP are going to increase with those subsidies. Okay, so again, the best answer for that, a positive supply shock. Remember, a negative supply shock is going to move us the other way in the case of like higher costs of production. But we want to be able to say right here, C is the best option. All right, so we have, it's a supply shifter, subsidies, supply shifter, positive supply shock. When we shift our supply to the right, we have actually a higher economic growth rate. So that part D is not the answer. Number 3, your definition of being employed or unemployed. Okay. Olivia in this case is a volunteer, meaning that she does not collect an income, so she's not going to be considered employed. She's just a volunteer. Remember, there's 3 ways we can fit into the labor force. We can be not in it, we can be employed, we can be unemployed. Those are the only 3 options options we can have. She, in this case, is not looking for anything. She's not going to accept any offers. So she's not unemployed. She's not looking for a job at all. She's going to be considered not in the labor force. All right, we've got expansionary fiscal policy. What's going to happen to the real GDP and interest rate in the short run? So this is, again, something we've recently talked about. Anytime I get these graphs, I try to, or I get something that I know I can draw a graph, I try to draw it. So here's our aggregate demand, same thing we just were kind of using, short run, aggregate supply, got our price level and our real GDP. So it's asking us expansionary fiscal policy. All right, we've got to tie that in. We got to know that that's going to increase our aggregate demand, okay? And when we increase our aggregate demand, we should know that price level, GDP are going to increase. Let's find the answer that says that. Real GDP goes up, nominal interest rate goes up, would be your best answer there. Again, using those graphs to answer some of these things is going to go a long way. If I were, just to repeat myself from what I've said many, many times, the first thing I do when I get the test booklet is try to draw as many graphs as I can that I can remember, that I can utilize throughout the course of the examination. All right. Economic growth is best measured and sustained by a sustained increase in which of the following? This is our long run aggregate supply curve. So what's going to cause our aggregate supply curve to move to the right? Okay. Well, per capita our GDP, or real GDP, sorry, that means more people are more productive. Okay, so an increase in in per capita GDP, that means people are more productive. That means we're using the same amount of resources to produce more stuff. That's going to cause economic growth. Kind of going through these other ones, budget deficits, not going to do it. That's going to, remember, eventually raise interest rates with our loanable funds graph, which eventually decreases our aggregate demand. Unemployment, that ain't going to do it because, again, that means people are unproductive. Production of public goods doesn't necessarily do it. That's the government purchasing those public goods. And nominal GDP, again, that's just year to year. That always goes up anyway, based on just generally caused by inflation. So we want real GDP. We want the real value. That's your best answer for that. Okay, so the long run Phillips curve. Let's draw that real quick. Remembering what that looks like. Okay. So our long run Phillips curve, remember, we've got inflation and unemployment. So I haven't even looked at the answers yet, but I have this picture in my brain of my long run Phillips curve here. Okay, it's straight up and down, remember? Short run Phillips curve is the one that does this. Okay, and so our long run Phillips curve says, okay, well, in our unemployment rate, whatever this percentage is, let's just call it 5%. Our inflation can be anywhere from 0 to 100%, right? So no matter what, our long run Phillips curve, which is going to show us our full employment rate, right? And the reason it's 5% is because people are always going to be looking or not looking for, looking for new jobs or better incomes. And so it's always going to come back to, again, in this case, I label it as 5%. We could set it at a different percent if we wanted to. But what it's showing us is that no matter what, we're going to come back to this. We're going to come back to this 5%. So our inflation has no trade-off determined by our unemployment in the long run. Remember, you got to know long run. Short run, we know. Short run, we drew that graph, right? Short runs here, we know that when they're in the short run, when there's low unemployment, high unemployment, that inflation is low, and vice versa. When unemployment is super low, like 1% or 0%, well, inflation goes up. Okay, so keep those straight. Try to draw these as much as you can. Sometimes these graphs will walk you into, a lot of times they'll walk you into the right answer. All right, we're getting asked here about, I've got to read it. We're getting asked here about a government increasing borrowing. Okay, so what's that going to happen to the prices of previously issued bonds and the price level in the short run? Okay, so the prices of bonds in this case are going to refer to the amount of time that I have to put them into an account, okay, to mature, so to speak. So here's our loanable funds graph. So like I said, this is referring to the opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost, here's our interest rate, here's our quantity. So here's our loanable funds graph. Okay, well, what we know is that the government, in this case, has decided to increase their demand. They are borrowing more money. Okay, so now our loanable funds graph is going to increase on the interest rate, and there's going to be more loaned out, obviously. Okay, so what we've got to now, let's go. Let me back up for a second. Let's do the easy part. Here's our aggregate demand. Here's our short run aggregate supply, right? Well, our aggregate demand for stuff is going to decrease because now we can't borrow as much money, right? So we know our price level is going to go down. Our output is going to also go down, all right? So we have that down, okay? So that's one of our columns. That's our price level, okay? Excuse me, let me go back. This is in the longer run, okay? The price level, in this case, we're going to increase our aggregate demand based on the government borrowing more money to increase spending. I'm sorry, they were not referring to the crowding out effect. I got ahead of myself. Okay, so we're going to increase aggregate demand. Okay, so our price level here is going to increase in this particular case. All righty, so our price level goes up. We have that. Now, we've got to know is now when I save my money in a bank, I can make more money in less time. So the time is the opportunity cost. Okay. So our bond prices, okay, which is the time it takes to mature that bond, all right, is going to decrease. Kind of a tough question there, a little bit of a next level thinking, one of the harder questions you might eventually see. All right, number 7 here, or number 8, sorry. Graph above shows it's a foreign exchange market, the U.S. in terms of Japanese yen. Assume there's an increase in United States consumers' preference for Japanese automobiles. All right, which of the following changes will most likely take place in the market for dollars? Okay, so we are talking about dollars. Here's what we know. All right, we know that we're going to buy more Japanese automobiles. All right, so when we draw that, here's the U.S. Here is the supply by US, demand by Japan, and here's Japan's graph. We got supply by Japan, demand by US. We've got the value over here, the J over US currency, and the U over the J currency quantity. Okay, so I've got my graphs drawn out. Again, they've kind of given us a graph up here, but it shows us for the foreign exchange dollars, it shows us for the United States dollars. All right, so what's going to happen in the market for US dollars? Okay, so here's what we know. All right, and this is where my brain kind of goes. We know that the demand for Japanese yen is going to increase. Okay, so that's what we know. So we know that, all right, because our change in preference, the US people want to buy more Japanese stuff. Well, when we do the demand by US over here, we've got to also do the supply by US over here. Okay, so this is what our US graph is going to look like. We've got a few different things here. We've got some depreciation, right? We've got an increase in the quantity, right? And obviously our decrease in the value also. We gave that term with depreciation. Let's look at our answers. All right. It's going to take more yen to purchase the same amount of dollars. That's not necessarily the case. All right. The demand for dollars increase. Here's our answer. The supply of dollars will increase. Both demand and supply of dollars will decrease. Not the case. No change. We have the supply of dollars will increase in that case. All right, we're figuring out the total GDP here. According to that above, which year was the GDP the largest? So what you've got to do, all right, is you've got to use this GDP deflator here, and you've got to make it so you're able to figure out based on that deflator where the highest value was. Okay, so the easiest way to do that is to simply divide by the deflator. Okay, so if you take 1400 divided by and turn this into a percentage. Okay, so 1400 divided by 0.7, figure that out. 18,000 divided by 100, we know that's our base year in this case because it's 100. 220 or 22,000 divided by 2.2, 50,000 divided by 2, 60,000 divided by 3. So again, out of these three here, we know that that's 18,000. 22,000 divided by 2.2, that is below, um, that is below uh, like 11,000. 50,000 divided by 2 is 25,000. 60,000 divided by 3 is 20,000. You just got to do some math. And I can't draw on this screen here, so just kind of bear with me with it. I don't have the math off the top of my head. 14,000 times 0.7, somewhere in the 21,000 range, probably at the very, very most. Okay, so again, figure that out. That's how you get to those numbers. All right. What happens if a country's government reduces business taxes? We've already had this question. We talked about increasing subsidies. So now we're going to do the same thing. We just changed the wording here. So what happens if a country's government reduces business taxes? Well, that's going to increase our supply. It's going to basically, at the end of the day, lower some type of cost. We got our aggregate demand, we got our short run aggregate supply, right? We got our price level and GDP down here. Okay, so we're going to increase our short run aggregate supply. We've got two things happen, right? Price level goes down, GDP also goes up. Let's see if we can tie that into an answer. The short run aggregate supply curve will shift to the right. That's what we did. It didn't ask us for the values of those axes. All right, so in the coffee market, which of the following changes will increase the price and decrease the quantity of coffee? If you're good with these, by all means, plug the answer in. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. What we're asking is what's going to happen in this particular thing, in a particular situation. Which of the following is going to occur to increase the price and decrease the quantity? So we got our demand, simple supply and demand, right? So we've got our price here, demand there, or quantity there. We're going to increase the price and decrease the quantity. And I'm going to double check and make sure that that's what's going on. All right, increase price, decrease quantity. The only way that we can get that point up and to the left is by decreasing our supply. Okay, so that's the only way that we can do it. Remember, we're only going to have one shift in this particular shift situation. If we were to all of a sudden increase our demand too, well, now our quantity is going to be indeterminate, which isn't what we're talking about right now, but it's as a review, we could figure that out if we needed to. Okay, so that is our decrease in supply. Let's look at our answers. Notice down here, our supply decrease, our demand is no change. Okay, make sure you're trusting what you're drawing, trusting what you see. Obviously, like our brains are probably going to be brought to these three answers right here because like, okay, these are the tricky ones, and they're not going to just throw in like as a test taker, you're like, why would they ever do that? They're just filling the slots. Trust yourself, okay, draw what's going on and be able to use these graphs for some reference points as you're going through them. All right, and an increase in inventories are increasing which component of GDP? Okay, so inventories is just a fancy way of saying that businesses have produced more stuff. Remember, there's four components of GDP, and this is just something you've got to kind of remember. We've got the personal consumption, that's the household consumption we've called it. We've got the business investment, right? And remember, when a business produces something, it can be called an investment because they're hoping to sell it for more than they produced it, right? They put a certain amount of money, a certain amount of value into producing it. Eventually, they're trying to sell it for higher than what their cost was. Not talking about government, not talking about exports, not talking about imports, just a simple definition term that, again, review the day before the exam and hopefully you're able to knock that out. Okay, question 13. This isn't actually on our syllabus, and I haven't necessarily seen anything to do with it, but I did look it up. So the velocity of money equals the price level times the quantity divided by the money supply. Okay, so we have our values here. The way you would figure this out, our velocity of money in this case is 3. Our price level equals 2. Our quantity produced equals 6,000. And then our money supply, this M, is going to be obviously just an M. All right. Do the math. So now we got 3M equals 18,000. Right, divide by 3, M equals 6,000. I had to look that up. That is no longer in our syllabus. You don't absolutely have to know that, but it is how you would figure that out if you needed to. At least you have an idea, you've seen it if they throw you a curveball. All right. What combinations of fiscal and monetary policy will reduce the price level? Okay, so we're trying to fix inflation, right? Fiscal policy is taxing and spending. Monetary policy is obviously going to want to interest rates, and they're going to want to eventually do this, right? So short run aggregate supply, we got our aggregate demand. We're trying to decrease aggregate demand one way or the other because we're reducing the price level, right? That's what we're trying to do. So which policies reduce the price level? Well, we can either on the fiscal policy side decrease spending or increase taxes. All right, so it looks like they're just dealing with spending here in terms of what we are looking at. So, oh, there's the taxes there. All right, so we're going to decrease spending, right? And if we want to lower the interest, I'm sorry, raise the interest rate, lower the money supply. That's what monetary policy does, right? If we want to raise the interest rate, what do? Well, buying government bonds makes our economy bigger. Buy big, right? Selling it makes it smaller. So we're going to sell, make the economy smaller, and be able to raise the interest rate that way. All right, remember, if they sell bonds, basically what happens is the bank takes the cash and they go put it in the Federal Reserve, which means that they have less money to loan out, which means they have to raise interest rates. All right, the discount rate, remember, that is the interest rate that banks charge each other when they get over withdrawn. Okay, well, that's decreasing the penalty. That doesn't make sense either. All right, so we're trying to get an increase in GDP in the long run. Okay, so that's going to be, remember, real GDP, an increase of our LRAS curve is trying to increase efficiency, right? Do we have, more land, more productive people, smarter people, whatever that might be? So technical progress makes things faster, more efficient. Investment in human capital, we're trying to make people smarter, better in what they do. New and natural resources that expands our land component, so to speak. Decrease in corporate taxes, that's going to shift our supply curve to the right. In the long run, that's going to allow companies to have more money to invest in all this stuff as well. Okay. Decrease in factor productivity, that's your easy answer because now we are not productive in any one of the factors, whether it be the land, labor, or capital factors in terms of what we're trying to produce. Government spending increases. At the same time, a country's central bank sells bonds in the open market. The interest rate and private investment in plant and equipment will most likely change in which of the following? Okay, so government spending increases. Let's draw this out. And to be honest, I have not looked at the answers yet. So let's draw this out and figure out what's happening. Okay, so we've got aggregate demand. We've got short run aggregate supply. All right, price level, GDP. So we've got, I'm going to change colors to keep things straight. We've got an increase in aggregate demand, an increase in government spending. Okay, let me double check what we're doing here. So I'm just like you. I'm going through these kind of for the first time here. Well, the second time, but I have to reread them. At the same time as a country's central bank sells bonds in the open market. So we're selling bonds. So that means we're trying to make the economy smaller. All right. So I know that like eventually we're going to be coming back over this way. We're kind of counteracting what's going on the aggregate demand. Okay. The interest rate and private investment in plant equipment will most likely change in which of the following ways? Okay, so here's what's happening. Okay, we actually don't necessarily need this graph. We do need our supply and money graph, right? So Government spending's gone up. We're going to assume that that's what's happened in terms of them needing to borrow more money. Government spending has gone up, right? And we also have the supply of money decreasing because we're selling bonds. Okay, so our interest rate has gone way up. So we know that. Okay, so since our interest rate is up, okay, eventually private investment is going to decrease. We can't afford to borrow nearly as much money, okay, businesses. Our interest rate, as we already drew, also increases. Okay, so that is how you can kind of get to that answer. Again, sometimes you got to take the long way around to figure out what you're going to do. I'm trying to simulate using these graphs to help you walk into some answers here. All right, going to number 17, our Phillips curve here. Which of the following would cause movement from point S to point R on the short run Phillips curve? So I'm going to draw this just so I can kind of draw on this. Make sure I'm drawing what I need to draw. Right. I'm not drawing what I need to draw right now. Sorry. All right, so we got long run. Abbreviate long run Phillips curve. We got inflation. We got unemployment. We go from S to R. Okay, so what's happened from S to R? We know that inflation's gone up, and we know that unemployment has gone down. Okay, so we know unemployment's gone down. I'll just write it in a couple different ways. Inflation's gone up. Okay, so that's what we know. All right, it's asking us what is the best example of what's occurred here. All right, so inflation's gone up, unemployment's gone down. So what we need to do, what we can tie this into is our long run aggregate, is our long run economic graph, right? So it's basically saying this has happened and this has happened. Okay, our GDP down here. Remember, we've called this axis employment before. Price levels obviously there. Okay, so what's going to cause something to move this way? Okay, so from here to here. So the obvious answer is it's going to be some type of increase in demand. Okay, so that's what eventually has to occur. So let's see if something that can happen to increase that aggregate demand. Gives us the correct answer, unanticipated increase in government spending. That adds to our GDP, right? That's part of our aggregate demand. The government is part of that. Adverse supply shock. Let's just kind of draw these to kind of prove ourselves incorrect here. Adverse supply shock is going to do that. That makes this happen and this happen. That's no good. That's not what we're asking. Letter C, a decrease in investment. A decrease in investment is going to do this, right? That's going to go here and here. Increase in real interest rates. That's also going to do this. Increase in labor force participation rate. That's going to actually be doing something like this. Okay, assuming they take lower wages, that may not necessarily shift things too far to the right. Okay, so only one that makes sense is an increase in government spending. All right. Couple more here. All right. Use fiscal policy to reduce inflation. Which of the following is most likely to happen in the short run? Remember our trade-off between inflation and unemployment. If the government is trying to reduce inflation, they can only reduce the demand curve. They can only decrease the demand. They only determine how much money you have in your pocket. Remember, this is fiscal policy. This is the government. Spending, taxes. The only thing they can do to reduce inflation is make people spend less money. How do they do that? Well, they decrease spending or they increase taxes in this case. Well, we're going to spend less money, so unemployment is the trade-off of that action. Crowding out refers to, remember, that is the federal government borrowing so much money that it moves our loanable funds market, right? So supply, demand, interest rate, quantity. The government increases their demand so much that it raises interest rates, okay? and now businesses, in this case, private investment businesses, again, the private sector decreases. Okay, investment spending decreases because interest rates are higher. Assume that a nation's real GDP grows at a higher rate than its population. Okay, so remember, population per capita GDP, it can be concluded. What we have to know is that we don't know if the population will grow faster forever. We don't know if the price level is going to go down. We do know that real GDP per capita has to go up. GDP is faster, population is slower, per capita has to increase. Okay, we don't know what real GDP is going to do in the, we don't know what it's doing, period, not to mention whether or not it's growing faster or slower. Okay, so anyway, per capita GDP has increased is the best answer. I know that's pretty lengthy. Hopefully you're able to fast forward through some of those. Trying to do my best to try to reach as many of you as possible, obviously, with the virtual world. If you have questions, by all means, try to get a hold of me, email me. I'm pretty available. Keep grinding it out. We're down to a couple weeks here.